All right, let's jump right in. The cyber threat landscape is always moving, but wow, the first half of December 2025, that was a whole different level. We saw a notorious group basically rise from the ashes, a completely surprising new industry caught in the crosshairs, and a single vulnerability exploited at, well, lightning speed. Let's break it all down.
So here's our game plan. We're going to kick things off with the 3 biggest stories you absolutely need to know. Then we'll dive into who the big players are in the ransomware world, and more importantly, who they're going after now. After that, we'll look at their favorite new weapon of choice, and finally, connect all the dots to figure out what this really means for you.
Okay, let's get right to the good stuff. If you only take away 3 things from this whole period, make it these headlines. Seriously, they set the stage for everything else we're about to cover.
So what were those big, earth-shaking stories? What's the intelligence telling us? Well, first up,
you heard that right. LockBit is back. I mean, just when the entire security community was breathing a sigh of relief, thinking they were gone for good, boom, they're back with a vengeance. It just goes to show you, taking these groups down is one thing, keeping them down is a whole other ballgame. And next, we saw this huge shift in who's getting hit. The construction industry is now the #1 target. That is a massive change from the usual suspects like tech and finance. And on the map, the UAE popped into the top 5 most attacked countries for the very first time, which tells us a new front is opening up in this cyber war.
And finally, the how. How did all this happen so fast? Well, it wasn't 1,000 different complex attacks. Nope. The vast majority of the damage we saw was done by exploiting one single critical flaw in a piece of software that's used everywhere. We're going to talk a lot more about React-to-Shell in just a minute.
Okay, now let's talk about the groups behind all this chaos. You got to think of the ransomware world like this hyper-competitive dark marketplace. And in December, we saw a major shakeup in who's sitting at the top.
So at a glance, you see this group, Qilin, and they look like they're just running away with it, right? Over a quarter of all attacks. But you know what? The real story here isn't who's at #1. It's about who just burst back onto the scene and who is climbing the ranks at a truly scary pace.
And this is where you really see the drama unfold. Check out LockBit. They went from NA, as in not applicable, totally dismantled, to the #3 spot, instantly. And then look at Coinbase Cartel. They jumped from 17th place all the way into the top 5. That is a massive leap.
You know, the threat brief we're pulling this from says it perfectly. It wasn't some slow, gradual comeback for LockBit. Their return had an immediate impact. This just proves how incredibly resilient and scary fast these top-tier criminal organizations can be.
So we know who the attackers are, but where are they pointing their weapons? This period showed us some genuinely shocking changes in who the victims are, and it proves that, honestly, no industry is safe anymore.
and here is that surprise. The construction industry literally surged from 4th place to become the most attacked sector out there, blowing past the usual targets like finance and manufacturing. So why? Well, attackers probably see them as a softer target, maybe with weaker security. Or they're betting that the tight deadlines on construction projects mean these companies are way more likely to just pay a ransom quickly to avoid crippling delays.
Now looking at the map, while the US and Canada are still the top targets, no surprise there, the real headline is the United Arab Emirates. They've entered the top 5 for the very first time. And this isn't random. It's directly tied to the activity of that fast-rising group we just saw, Coinbase Cartel.
So let's talk about this number, 81.37%. What is that? Well, that is the percentage of all ransomware attacks in this period that targeted small businesses. Let that sink in, over 80%.
And here's the really crucial point. This is a deliberate strategy. Attackers are actively shifting their focus. While we're seeing fewer attacks on giant corporations, they are seriously ramping up their campaigns against smaller companies, almost certainly because they see them as easier, more vulnerable targets.
All right, let's get to the how. How on earth did so many different groups hit so many different targets so incredibly fast? It's because they all had the same weapon. Think of it like a brand new digital master key that can unlock countless doors all across the internet. And that master key has a name, React-to-Shell. It's a critical vulnerability found in a super popular piece of web technology made by Meta. The simplest way to think about it is this. If a website is built using this component, this flaw basically gives an attacker a key to just walk right in the front door and take over everything. And the scale of this thing is just staggering.
Our intelligence directly ties this one vulnerability to at least 30 successful breaches in just a couple of weeks, and scans found over 77,000 servers on the internet that are still vulnerable to it right now.
These UNC codes, that's just how researchers track different hacker groups. The key thing to see here is that it wasn't just one crew using React to Shell. A whole ecosystem of attackers jumped on this flaw and turned it into a weapon almost instantly.
Okay, so we've seen the who, the what, and the how. Let's pull it all together in this last section and talk about the bigger trend that all of this is pointing to.
This right here is the new attack playbook. A critical flaw like React to Shell gets discovered, and then within days, I'm not talking weeks or months, I mean days, multiple hacker groups have already built it into a weapon. Then, they just spray that weapon across the internet, hitting the easiest, most opportunistic targets they can find, which, as we've seen, increasingly means smaller businesses.
This really puts that shift into sharp focus. The old way of doing things was all about these slow, careful, long-term attacks against huge companies. The new model? It's all about speed and scale. Find one big flaw and use it to hit as many smaller, less defended targets as you possibly can, as fast as you can.
So if you remember just one thing from this entire explainer, please make it this. The threat landscape is accelerating. The name of the game is no longer this intricate digital spycraft against giant corporations. It's about rapid, widespread exploitation of the most vulnerable parts of our digital world.
And that really leaves us with a critical and kind of scary question. With the time between a flaw's discovery and its weaponization shrinking from weeks down to mere days, how can anyone, especially smaller businesses, realistically hope to keep up?